Welcome back to the Political Potatoes podcast. Today, my guest is Matt Todd, the creator of the Ranch podcast. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Thank you, Greg. How are you, sir?
I'm good. For those of you who don't know you yet, I'm sure most people do by now here in Idaho. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So was born and raised in Northern California, and I lived and worked and was educated in the same 5 mile radius my entire life. So I grew up in this area called Concord. It's kind of like Garden City, and I was able to make it to UC Berkeley. I don't care for Berkeley at all as a city or a place, but the education was pretty good. And then I made it to this little area called Danville, which is kind of like Eagle. And that little triangle is really where I spent 99% of my entire life. In 2020 through 2022, as most people experience, California was already struggling for a number of reasons and then kind of tipped us over. So I moved at the beginning of 22 in January to the Ada County area. And I hadn't been to Idaho for like 48 hours to look for a house. I knew one person that lived here, and my wife had in fact never even been here before we moved in. So she took a big leap of faith with me on that one. So we moved, me and my 3 boys, up to Idaho, and very quickly after getting here, it was obvious that one, I knew I didn't know anything about Idaho, but I also didn't know where to get that information, and that was really problematic. So I was like, okay, well, I want to know about Idaho, right? Like I like it here, just as the brief amount of time I've been here, but I don't know what this place is. Like, I don't know who the people are. I didn't know anything about the political system, the taxing system, recreation, like conservation now to me and real professional conservationists means something completely different than what I knew growing up. So it was a total, paradigm shift. So in 22, before I moved to Idaho, all I had done from the week I graduated college until the week I moved here was SAT tutoring. And I know that sounds very odd, but I got into tutoring when I was in college. I really enjoyed math, and I also enjoyed communication and English and writing. So I graduated and I started a tutoring company, and that's all I did my entire life. So it's like moving up here, I left that, but my students in the last few years I was there, they encouraged me to start. They're like, you should do a podcast. That'd be great. It's like, well, I don't know anything about doing podcasts. I don't have an audio video background. Thought it was like, okay, it could be fun. And you know what? If somebody can learn it, I'm pretty sure I can learn it. So I, bought a compressor mic off of Amazon and started this, audio only kind of like a random podcast. It was a bunch of little like 10-minute episodes, like thought bubblegum for the 16 and 17-year-olds. But then it also moved into an interview hub during COVID because nobody was talking to each other, right? Like you had teachers unions screaming at the parents who were screaming at the school district, who were screaming at the health professionals. Nobody was actually communicating and understanding what was going on. So even though I started out for kind of my students, it turned into this kind of community hub for good faith communication. So I cut my teeth kind of on school board elections in 2020 and then, kind of trying to bring the community together to at least talk over the next, year or so. So when I moved here and I realized I didn't know anything, I was like, look, I really only know one way to find out about what is actually happening. And that's to sit down and talk to people in good faith in long format. Like, I don't want to hear a soundbite. I don't want to hear just like a social media clip. I want to actually understand what's going on. So in the middle of 22, I built a podcast studio. I was like, okay, I'll just give this a shot and I'll call it The Ranch because I thought that was, like a cool name and kind of around the community I lived in. And I also thought it would apply to Idaho in kind of a broader sense, in kind of a cool way. And I had to start super hyper local. Instead of saying, hey, I don't know anything about Idaho, but I'm going to talk to like the biggest Idaho people. It was, no. Let me talk to my neighbor first. Like if I can't bring some kind of value to my neighbor or to my street or to my neighborhood, I'm not going to bring value to the broader Idaho community. So the first episode was literally with a neighbor about like an HOA meeting. And then, episode number, 8 was about something that was happening at our local elementary school. And then, I kept building up in guests. And every time I would talk to people, they're like, this was great. But you should talk to like this guy, or you should talk to that gal. Cause like these crazy things have happened and this would be great for them to explain it. So I kept building up. I eventually ended up talking to Sheriff Clifford during his campaign in 22. And I didn't know, this is really embarrassing. I didn't know Ada County included the city of Boise. I thought Ada County was only Eagle and Meridian. And I was like, here's like this small town sheriff. I didn't know like questions to ask. I didn't know, like, it was really embarrassing. But again, learning. And Sheriff Clifford actually had he enjoyed the conversation. I didn't know all the nuances of the sheriff's office in Ada County, but I had good enough questions. So over the next year, I continue interviewing people, and then Eagle in 23 was having a really contentious mayoral race and city council kind of election round. And I invited Sheriff Clifford on again to explain the contract city, because Eagle doesn't have a police department. It contracts with Ada County Sheriff. He comes in, and by this time I realized the error. I'm like, hey man, I'm really sorry. I didn't know you're like the biggest sheriff in Idaho. He's like, oh, it's fine. We have a great conversation. That episode leads to me talking to all of the people in Eagle, because people start paying attention. Like, wow, that was a great episode. Like, great explanation. Totally understand things. I get all of the people that are running for mayor and city council and school board. All of a sudden, people really started paying attention. That season kind of led into me eventually interviewing the Secretary of State, Phil McGrain, in, I think it was like April of 24. And that was a big jump. It was like you would only talk to people in Eagle, and now you interview this constitutional officer for the state of Idaho. It was like, this is really wild. He really enjoyed that episode. He was able to explain a lot of aspects of the election system and things of that nature. That led to a big election series in advance of the November 24 presidential election. And then essentially shortly thereafter, Governor Little came on the show. I got Senator Jim Risch on the show. And then since then, it was like I covered the entire legislative session. It was like 170 episodes in 90 days. And it has just been kind of caught wildfire from there. So that's kind of like, in a nutshell, how pathetic and humble the origins were, and then how it slowly ramped up over the last 3.5 years to kind of be what it is today.
So was there a specific moment or conversation that made you realize that Idaho really needed something like this?
Yeah. Okay. That's a great question. My former state has real problems, and these can be very easily seen. A lot of the things that you see on social media around California, those things did happen, and they happened to me, and they happened to my family and my community. They don't happen in every area of California, but a lot of them did. I did experience those firsthand. But what I also experienced in California was this like crazy misinformation machine about anybody who would speak out against some of the more inflammatory things that you see and were actually happening. Anybody who would speak out against that, myself included, I'm like, hey man, this doesn't make sense. Like, why are we, gender confusion within bathrooms? Like, this doesn't make sense. This is a 14-year-old girl saying she feels really uncomfortable with this like 15-year-old biological male in the change room with her. Like, why is she a bad person? And of course, this information machine turns on, I'm this bigoted, terrible person. And fine, like, people can say whatever they want, doesn't matter to me. But I realized really quickly, I'm like, okay, the news media and social media in general, they are not presenting the whole answer to what's going on. And we're not getting the real, everybody's going for max views, max impressions, max, clickbait essentially. And so in 22, I remember there was something going around, I think, about the library bills. And I don't know the nuances of the library bills that were presented in 2022 in the legislative session, but I remember seeing clips of social media content. One saying that this legislator wants porn in, school libraries and all these things, and somebody else, all these things flying around. I was like, man, I don't know a lot about Idaho. I've been here for like 3 months or something, but I'm pretty sure we don't have state legislators that want pornography in school libraries. But how was I going to find out, right? Who had the information? And so again, looking back on it, it was look, I don't know the answer, but I know this is not true. And it was this long process of figuring out, okay, how could I first off find out for myself what that better information is? And two, and this is the kicker, not be the person trying to tell everybody what reality is, because I don't know anything, right? It's like, how do I present people who have the actual information to the populace, and then the populace can decide what they believe? It's none of my affair, right? But I can't be the guy saying like, I know the truth, which everybody wants to be. It's like, oh, unequivocally. And then, if you say, it's always, subject to kind of like a spin. But that time in 22 was really like, hey man, we need something that presents the actual leaders and people with information in Idaho to the populace, to at least offer an opportunity to hear directly from the horse's mouth, instead of what this slanderous, sensationalist, content is that we all come to expect on social media. So that was, I think, kind of the time.
You brought up a really interesting point here about having those discussions and trying to not preach or not try to say, okay, this is what it should be, right? It's this idea of, okay, we want to ask the questions and talk to people. And I've experienced that as well. My podcast, like I'm like I have to hold back and like, okay, I want to say something, but I'm just gonna let them talk. But that leads to the next question is how do you balance being a host versus being part of the conversation yourself?
That's a really good question. My play and my view of what my role is one of a decentralized value proposition for the end user, and decentralized in that I, the host, am not the person who's in charge of having the right answer, having all the information. It's no. It's who the guest is, right? It's occasionally I do, but it's very rare that I ever speak directly to the audience and say, "Hey, this is Matt. Let me tell you something." Right? So for me, I very much view my role as, look, you need to present the market, right? Like you need to open up, you need to have a platform that people are voluntarily engaging and talking in. And that is one of the most difficult things. People have to voluntarily come in. So when I have the head of the Democratic Party, Lauren Necache, she voluntarily comes in. When I have the president of Idaho Freedom Foundation, Ron Nate, he voluntarily comes in. So you have to get people to voluntarily come in to present their perspective and their sides. And great, like, let's have that. And then as far as being part of the conversation, I have to know what questions, I have to bring an actual genuine curiosity because I can't do episodes that I'm not interested in. Like I want to die. Like if I've tried to do things that people wanted me to do before, they're like, do this, it would be really interesting. It's like, well, I don't really see that, but like I'll give it a shot. It's terrible. Like I can't stay focused. I don't have good questions. I try to speak to people that one I'm interested in and speak on things that I'm interested in personally. That allows me to engage in a good faith conversation of curiosity. And then the other side of it is like I made mistakes in my early interviews, like the Sheriff Clifford example when he comes in 22. I made mistakes in that episode because I was uneducated on what issues really were in Ada County. Like it's not like I'm a bad person for inviting Sheriff Clifford to come on and talk about what was going on in Ada County. It's not that. It's just that I didn't really make as useful of a conversation because I didn't know what to ask. I wasn't informed on things. I had a conversation just this morning with the COO of Idaho Power, Adam Risch. Fantastic conversation. We talked about three specific things. The first was irrigation farmers and why their rate is higher than large load customers, but why it's less than residential customers. Okay, so why are people that are pumping water to grow our food paying more than, say, like a Micron expansion? That's a really important question. That's very complex, by the way. Then you have the problem with solar customers getting reimbursed at a lower than what they think they should be getting rate. And the problem with, okay, if the salesperson told you something, Idaho Power can't affect that. If the salesperson promised you your excess power would be bought back or you'd get a credit for like 15 cents a kilowatt hour, I can't do anything about that. But then all these people are mad at Idaho Power because they're not getting the 15 cent per kilowatt hour. That's like, okay, that's complex. And then we finished on transmission lines and permitting. So we have the Boardman to Hemingway transmission line and we have the SWIP transmission line that was being built by the same company that was slotted to build the Lava Ridge windmill farm. Like these are all really complex conversations. I'm not telling people what the answer is. That's Adam's job, but it is my job as part of the conversation to one, actually care about what Adam's going to talk about and know enough so that I have the capacity to ask the right questions and engage in thoughtful back and forth dialogue that brings a more fruitful or full picture of the conversation. So like, that's kind of a long answer to your question. I have to be curious, but I also have to really know enough so that people don't just walk away from the conversation saying like, okay, those were two people talking and it was fun to hear them talk, but I didn't like learn enough from it. You always have to have an entertainment and voluntary consumption aspect of it, but you also, to make it a real thing, you have to have this incredible information base where people are like, oh my God, I had no idea. And then the guest expert, like Adam Rischens in this case, he has to walk away saying, oh my gosh, this was great. Like the way the conversation went, Matt knew enough that he was able to steer it in a way that allowed me to explain more fully or hit different avenues of it instead of just okay, like I guess I'm just going to tell you about transmission lines now. And then you have like a monologue for 20 minutes and people are like dying on the other end, so yeah, I'm sorry, that's a long answer.
No, you're good. I appreciate the level of detail. You've done hundreds of episodes. I think I heard at one point you've done what, 400 or so?
I've done 400 this year.
this year? Oh, so total, how
this
many
year.
have you done on the ranch?
Yes. No, no, no. It's fine. So we did, yeah, I think my previous podcast, I did about 420. And this podcast, I think I published 668 this morning. So again, this year, 2025, I will do roughly 450.
So those are videos or actual interviews?
Those are 450 videoed interviews. And then, so all of those videos go out, and then I publish roughly between 15 and 20 small clips to be published on, social media platforms, be it Instagram or YouTube or TikTok or something like that. So I publish roughly like 15 to 20 of those per week. So, 1,000 easy on top of the actual video interviews.
So after all these hundreds of episodes, how would you describe what the ranch actually is now?
It's a conduit, right? It's a conduit to people that you and I, as average citizens, would never, ever have access to or ever hear from in a million years. Oh, I'll give you a perfect example. I had this gentleman by the name of Scott Nichols on. His episode has not published. He used to work for a US Geothermal. That company, I believe, got bought by Ormat, which is an Israeli geothermal company. Scott and another gentleman got a hold of me. I've been doing a lot of energy interviews. They took me out to Neil's Hot Springs, which is a geothermal plant in Eastern Oregon. I got to go out with them, drive for hours out there. Fantastic conversation. I get to go see the geothermal plant, which is wild, by the way. Super cool. He's describing all of the geology around it, all the different plates. We actually stopped when we were about 15 minutes away from the geothermal plant. He's like, look at that. And I look down and it looks like bubbling asphalt. He's like, that's heat coming out of the ground. And it was this little quarter size hot spring in the middle of this driveway. We pull over. I actually took a little video of it, but I spend the whole day with him. Fantastic conversation. Then he comes in for an interview. He goes into detail about prospecting for geothermal in Idaho, the 3 different types of geothermal that we can expect, be it geothermal that's around 150 degrees that could heat up perhaps a commercial building or a residential development, be it geothermal that comes out at 350 to 400 degrees, and you can use that to drive a compression cycle and then drive energy, or you have hot rock geothermal, which is essentially you have a very, very hot area, like 600-700 degrees underground that also doesn't have the presence of a liquid, but you have this really hot area that has vacancies in it. And that you pipe down like 6,000 feet, a big delivery line that splits into capillaries that actually expels liquid that is then met by another capillary line and pump line that pulls that back. So you pump down this liquid at like, say, 70 degrees. It gets super heated and then sucked up by these other capillaries and shoots back up, and you can drive a generation cycle and drive an electrical plant off of that. Now, he told me all about these things. There's no world where Matt, as an average citizen, ever get to meet Scott Nichols, do a tour of Ormat's plant, understand these different things. And by the way, these are things that will affect your life and my life. This is reality, that we're using geothermal to help bridge electrical generation gaps. Geothermal, though, is not the answer that people are making it out to be. There are a lot of people like geothermal will have like 500 megawatts or 1,000 megawatts of power capacity thanks to No, man, these plants are like 20, 30, 40 megawatts of capacity in geothermal. And by the way, it's really hard to find and prospect because you got to find just the right area, all of these things going into it. So the ranch at this point has become this conduit to the actual happenings and fundamental underpinnings of Idaho that do absolutely affect us, but we would never know. And because we lack that connectivity in average everyday life, you and I are really open and susceptible to manipulation as private citizens. If we had some elected representative come on hey man, I got a great relationship with Ormat. We're going to solve the power problem. And guess what? It's going to be green because we're going to use geothermal. It's going to be incredible. We already have geothermal downtown. Walk downtown, this building, they'll have a stamp. It says geothermal heated. We're going to be great. You and I, if we don't know any better, we're like, that sounds awesome. Let's go ahead and do that. Yeah, man, but that's not reality. So this is a conduit to the actual leaders of Idaho and the underpinnings of how things work as an education and a check against ignorance and manipulation for the average citizen. That's really what it has become.
So it sounds like you're providing listeners, voters, people across the state access to, political figures, people in power, et cetera. And you don't have to give them donuts. They can just listen to this for free. And I think that's great. Listen to what you're doing, the work you've done. And I guess my question is, Where do you see yourself with this podcast? Do you see this more as journalism, entertainment, or productive civic conversations?
That's a great question. I would not say it's journalism. I think journalism at its core, like, and again, no shade on journalists. I think journalism at its core, as it has always been done, is an inherent filtration mechanism. Okay. Because with journalists, the idea is not classically like if you're looking at a newspaper. Margaret Carmel is a perfect example. Margaret Carmel of Boise Dev, love Margaret Carmel. Don Day, I recently interviewed him, the founder and owner of Boise Dev, interviewed him. Fantastic guy. These people are working as hard as they can to bring information to Idaho, and they're doing a fantastic job. Now, if you check out Margaret Carmel's, like local candidate reviews, Margaret Carmel goes out and functionally interviews people and gets information, talks to them for a long time. Margaret's incredibly bright. I call her when I have them, like, Margaret, how does this work? She's like, okay, very kind, takes my call, explains it to me. I'm like, bless you, woman. I don't know who else I would call. But the problem is, at the end of the day, when Margaret writes an article, Margaret is the filtration mechanism that then gives background, gives perspectives, takes out quotes from the candidates. And I don't think she's doing it. She's doing it the best out of anybody I've ever seen, to be clear. But viewers and readers know that they're reading what Margaret is writing. And very much like in the election system, whenever somebody loses an election, which we'll always have when, we have more than one person running, you will have accusations of either, okay, the election system was rigged, which we see all the time, or you'll have, okay, but this journalist, did me wrong. The journalist didn't say this, or the journalist didn't say that. There's a real problem with that. And people are very worried culturally now about taking information from somebody else when there's a filtration mechanism. So what I do is, I think more specifically public discourse, right? I don't think it's journalism, although I do have to have an enormous amount of information about the topics that I dive into and engage with people, or else I'm going to have the Sheriff Clifford episode where I have no idea that it even includes the city of Boise. I'm sorry, Sheriff Clifford. Anyway, so I have to know a lot about it, but I'm not the one filtering information. I mean, obviously I do engage in conversations with people, and I have had people kind of go off the rails for one perspective or another. But again, at the core of it, I'm not trying to filter out what people get and then decide for them, like, okay, this is the most important thing. So I would say it's definitely much more public discourse and just public conversations.
I'm a big advocate for applying data analytics and audience insights into my work, and I'm interested in your approach. Like, who do you feel your audience is? Are they voters, political insiders, curious citizens? What does that look like?
So politicians, for sure. I have politicians that reach out and say, hey, do you have an episode on this topic? Because I need to learn about this. Or people that, I do an episode with somebody and then I find out from the guest, like, oh, this big up guy called me the day it came out and said, like, he or she had never heard that side of the story before, and they were going to be following up to get more information. So you definitely have the political class that's listening, educating themselves and wanting to be part of the conversation. I like to imagine I never try to let the algorithms or the audience steer the content, specifically because if you do, you just become a function of something else. It's not like if my show, if I'm like, okay, where did I get the most responses? Okay, let's go down that rabbit hole. Then what I do is I just become a function of whatever other people want. And if they don't want something, I don't do it. And if they do want something, I double down. I do it 10 times, right? Because that's what they want. And at that point, I don't really have a show. It's not really about Matt's interest. It's about, okay, I just became like everyone else. I'm just going for the max attention, max views, max notoriety, whatever it is. That's a real danger. And I think it's one that a lot of outlets, be it, social media outlets or classic news outlets, have fallen into. So what I try to do is always have an air of, am I interested in this? And do I want to talk to this person about it? If I do that, I would like to imagine that, one, I always make content that I personally find interesting. And then I imagine it's like, okay, there's got to be someone else out there that will hear this and say, like, oh my gosh, I had no idea, which is what I come to saying all the time on the show. That's kind of what happens. Now, who those people are, it always surprises me. Like, I might get some gal in the Farm Bureau in Cassia County who hits me up and is like, I had no idea. Thank you so much. I might get, a law enforcement agent that's high up that hits me up like, if you had asked me if I wanted to hear an episode about that, I would have said no 1,000 times over. But I listened to that episode because I trusted you, and I had no idea, and I couldn't stop listening. So there's this, I don't know who listens, but I know that if I do my job right with doing things that in good faith I want to talk about and I do a good enough job carrying the conversation, people will watch. People will like get things out of it. And I had Superintendent Debbie Critchfield on recently, and she articulated a point about CTE programs. She said, well, look, we're number one. This is what she said. We're number one in the nation. Idaho is in the nation for enrollment for CTE with dual enrollment for dual credit programs. We're number one. We're number five in gross numbers of students enrolled in CTE in general. Okay, so number five in that, and then number one in the other category. We're also at the highest high school graduation rate that we have been in 10 years. Okay, all of this stuff comes out. I put that clip out, and the number of people were like, what? I had no idea. Other people, well, yeah, my kid went through this program. He's crushing or she's crushing. It's fantastic. And then, of course, people are like, that can't be true. There's no way that's true. It's like, yeah, it is. So you have this information that goes out. And again, if it's good information, you'll have people be like, oh my gosh, that's wild. So I always try to go after that, not from a, oh my gosh, provocative, inflammatory, but on, oh my gosh, that's awesome, or that's crazy, or that I had no idea, but always Idaho centered in good faith.
So I just want to say, I really appreciate what you were saying about your approach to just kind of being honest about what you want to do and not chasing the algorithm. Because I think you and I both know nuance doesn't play well with algorithms, right? It's all about outrage and absolutism, which perform better. It's that black and white, and I want an emotional reaction to what you're saying, and that plays better on X and Instagram,
Everywhere.
TikTok, everywhere, right? And so I appreciate you taking that approach and not chasing that, and just focusing on trying to be everywhere to meet people where they're at. So my next question to you is kind of your best and worst moments, right? So which episodes stand out as your personal favorites? What's something that really happened, or did you learn something new?
Okay. There's a guy by the name of Charlie Lyons, and Charlie Lyons is a rancher. I met Charlie. He came in, the cattleman introduced me to him, and I was very interested. I was starting to dive into wildland fire protection and wildland rangeland protection agencies, because somebody told me, they're like, listen, man, ranchers, cattle people, agriculture, like they really care about the land. And by the way, like they fork up their own money to run like fire protection on it. I was like, what? I had no idea. This was like it was like mid to late 24. Like, that's crazy. They do. Like they have their own fire departments. They're like, no, they don't have fire departments. I think it's agencies, and like they'll spend all night on tops of hills watching, like camping out there, and like all of these things. I was like, can you get me somebody to talk about? So this guy, Charlie Lyons, comes in, and there was something different about Charlie, like right out of the get-go. And there was like an air of authenticity and humanity to him that I was like, what? Like, this is not just a spokesman. Like, who is this guy? So we start talking, and he takes me through this journey of being this rancher in Idaho, facing these incredible hardships because of these wildland fires that would break out, destroy their wintering area, cost them tens and tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars, like all of these different things. And he and other ranchers were attempting to fight these fires by themselves, or in advance of Bureau of Land Management and other fire agencies that were coming out. But they'd get out there with their own bulldozers, with their own water trucks, like running around trying to hook them, cut fire breaks, all of these things, like just ranchers with no formal fire protection, trying to protect tens and hundreds of thousands of acres so that they could, it's like, first off, when something burns, if you have like a winter rangeland and it burns, it's a 2-year automatic rest period. So they can't go back on for 2 years. So now they got to find a different place to bring their cattle. They may have to buy all this feed, like their leases are shot, like all of these things. And you can imagine that it's like there was no solution being presented. And then there was a notable example of people dying in a fire, which was terrible. And then people were like, okay, look, no one can go out and fight these fires, because it was kind of just like people were just kind of patching it together. And then there was a judgment, an actual court judgment. It's like, listen, if you're not part of these things, you can't be out there in like a bulldozer fighting these fires. Like that's illegal. So then it became this legal argument. And then just like the ranchers were like, dude, I don't care what the court says. I'm trying to protect my home and my livelihood. Like I'm going out there right now. So there was this huge tension between, Bureau of Land Management and the ranchers. And Charlie is explaining this and, had the humility to view himself as a younger man, thinking he was doing the right thing, fighting with these other agencies and standing up for the ranchers. Like the way he said, he's like, I thought I was an asset. I thought I was helping people. It's like, I wasn't. I was just being, nearsighted. I was being pig-headed, thinking that like, oh, BLM doesn't care. And he was in tears. He's like, the respect I have for the men and women of BLM is just so profound, like the work they do. And we were both like crying, going through the story, but it was this story about how in the absence of a solution, and I've come to realize this is like the way of Idaho, in the absence of a solution anywhere, like Idaho has to create one, like the people of Idaho create one. And so they created these rangelands fire protection agencies where people had to get certifications, but they got a legal standing, they got training, they got all of these things. You have to have like an emergency tent, like all these different things, right? And then the politicians got on board with it, and they made these, again, I always screw it up. It's agency or associations, but there's like a dozen of them now across the state of Idaho that fill these gaps in areas where either the resources were scarce or there was too much at risk. And it was the most beautiful story that I think to date I've heard. And it to this day still resonates with me as like when you talk about what makes Idaho, Idaho, it's people that are looking for solutions and will solve the world's problems themselves if you give them enough space and time. And man, it's a beautiful episode. I would say the worst episode I had was one over the legislative session this last year, which never aired. I very, very rarely have conversations with people that I feel like go sideways. And this one, absolutely, it was my mistake and I let it go sideways. And my personal perspective really came out and I kind of sunk my teeth into the guest. And I walked away from that thinking, this is not, I stand by everything I said. And by the way, I think I was right. But that's not what this show is. Like you can have this conversation in private, but you're doing yourself and the audience a disservice if you let the show become this thing. And so I got a hold of the guest. I was like, hey man, at first I'm sorry because I don't feel like I was very nice to the person. And after that I was like, hey, I'm just not going to air this unless you object. And the person was like, no, that's fine. So yeah, man, like I slip at times, like I forget myself, I get tired, but yeah, that was one that, I'll tell you about it off air.
No worries. I totally understand that. And, you don't want to be turned into a lightning rod or find yourself as labeled as contention or touching
right.
those third rails, right? I think
somebody that ambushes their guest and the guest knew what he was getting in for. Like the guest knew what we were going to be talking about. So it's like, it wasn't that he was entirely ill-informed, but man, I went too hard. I went really hard.
Well, and I appreciate you coming on this show because I think that in itself is brave. I know a lot of people probably don't want to.
Dude, nobody likes me anyway. It's fine.
But no, I think you have a lot of fans, and I don't think that's the issue. So
not the political parties. All of the Republicans call me a crazy Dem, and all the Dems call me a hardcore righty. Like they hate me. Like normal people like me though. I'm for the people.
Well, let me ask you because that's a really good point. Not to shift the flow or anything.
No.
I guess where do you like on the political spectrum? Because I kind of track it as there's a lot of nuance in it, right? There's a spectrum from the left to the right, but and you take the line in the middle, right? It's the center right, center left to Republican, conservative to all the way, as James Lindsay called it, the woke right, or
right.
all the way out, and then the left, same thing, right? You get those far left where you have a lot of extremes. So where do you see yourself on that spectrum?
You know what's interesting? I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I don't think that there's any actual political class or categorization of political class that encompasses anybody's actual perspective. Like I guarantee you, if you state that you're a Republican, you're like, yeah, but there are things I don't like. If you say you're a Democrat, you're like, yeah, but there are things I don't like. I mean, like that's just the way this goes. So for me, it's like, yeah, there are things I don't like. And then there's things that I think are very common sense that, some parties theoretically stand for, but in practice they don't. There are, here's one for you. I had to kind of explain this. I had a Jackie Catleron, professor from BSU. Okay. She's a political science professor. And I was asking her one day, I was like, hey, can you help me understand this? Because I think what I'm starting to understand about political parties is Republicans in general are aiming for a target, right? And that target could be personal liberty, fiscal responsibility, limited government, things of that nature. It's like, okay. And they use those principles to like beat up on decisions and like just, go kind of hover over that target and they're trying to get closer and closer, right? She's like, oh yeah, okay. They're like, but Democrats don't necessarily have a target, and it's not obviously not all Democrats, right? But they don't necessarily have a target. They have a direction because the idea is progress, right? Progress. We're going further this way. We need more, like wherever we are now, we need to make progress tomorrow. We need to make progress tomorrow. So they're going in a direction. They're not shooting for a target. They're shooting for momentum and movement in that direction. She's like, yeah, that's actually pretty accurate. And she described it as an umbrella party versus like a target. Anyways, that being said, it's like, okay, well then, the Democrats of 20 years ago are not where they are. I don't know if you'd call it progress that they've made, but it's like, it's not where they are now. And the Republicans of today have taken the concept of the principles that they're shooting for a target and use them in ways that it's like, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. Like, okay, fiscally conservative does not mean you just spend no money. Fiscally conservative means you don't waste money, and waste is a value judgment, right? So fiscal conservative at its core has a question of value for the taxpayer. It's not a just $0, right? So for me, it's like, well, none of this makes sense, right? And that's like, truthfully, I talk to everybody across the political spectrum and I walk away like, yeah, that person had some good points. They also walk away usually being like, that didn't really make sense either. That was a party talking point. But I almost always glean insight and like, I had never thought of it that way. And like, I could totally see that. I'm not saying I agree with it, but I could totally see it. So genuinely, there is no articulation that I think could accurately reflect or be representative of what I think politically, because we pigeonhole ourselves into these absurd representations of what parties and their core principles even have become.
No, I appreciate that answer. And I also appreciate that you said earlier that you're having these interviews in good faith and coming from a position of curiosity and integrity. And I think that's important. And you've had a wide range of guests, including some pretty polarizing ones.
Yeah.
Where do you draw the line between giving people a voice and amplifying harmful ideas?
Oh, dude, that's a really, really good question. I had this person reach out on, I think it was Instagram, and they were like, hey, I really love the show. I had some nice things to say, and not in like I believe this person. I'm like, okay, I believe you're watching the show. And, had some questions about some of the guests I had. Yeah, no problem. And like a week later, he's like, hey man, what do you think about getting on some like Christian nationalists? He's like, I know a couple in the area. And this particular person was a little bit more left leaning. And instantly the hairs on the back of my neck go up. I'm like, hey man, look, I don't know what you've seen about this show, but I'm not interested in just picking up some lightning rod insanity for the sake of doing that. Okay. I also had somebody ask during the legislative session, like, hey, would you want to have this person on your show? And they sent me a link. I'm like, okay, well, like, why? Who's this person? They're like, well, it's the first transgender person to ever serve in the Idaho legislature. I was like, well, what has the person done? And they're like, well, was the first transgender. I'm like, that's meaningless to me. Like, I'm not interested in having somebody on just because they happen to be transgender. What does this person do? Is there a perspective? Is there a legislation that this person is run? Like, none of that matters to me. So, I guess the point that I'm making in relation to your question is I, again, only engage in conversations and with people that I find interesting and I want to engage in for reasons that I think are important. If that means like, I haven't really run into this problem just yet, but if that means that, say there's a reasonable contender, okay, let's take, fictitious person, Matt 2.0. Matt 2.0 is running for governor of Idaho. Okay. Matt 2.0 is either crazy hard right, like crazy, or crazy hard left. Again, equally crazy. It doesn't matter to me either way. Like, and this is a serious contender. I would invite that person on the show because the person is related to Idaho and a serious contender for governor. It's like, okay, great. I'm going to have this conversation with this person. Now, if the person just happens to be crazy hard right or crazy hard left, like, no, I'm not really interested in engaging in conversations with people that are just crazy one way or another. Like, that's not interesting or valuable for me or, I think the populace. That's just going to be like a lightning rod and inflammatory. But so again, I don't really consider it that way. It's more of who is this person and what are they doing that's related to the thing that I love, which is Idaho. And if I can look at these things through that lens, that's how I kind of tease out, how I address how I address the problems of, do you want to quote platform this person? It's like, okay, am I platforming a person who may have been, really like done or said really bad things? Or am I talking to a person who's running for governor as a serious contender, and the people of Idaho should know about this person. So that's kind of the rubric I run through in my head.
So going back to the example, right? A fictitious
Yeah, sure,
example,
sure.
allegedly, hypothetically, whatever you
Yeah, Matt
wanted.
2.0, the crazy person Matt 2.0.
So say someone has influence in Idaho and they regularly promote anti-Semitic or conspiratorial content and misinformation. Do you engage
Yeah,
with
yeah.
them publicly, or is that where you take a step back?
That's a great question. Now, I think it depends. I need to ask a question back to you. What does influence mean? Are these public office holders? Are they, is it somebody just with like a big following on Instagram? Is it like, who is it? What does the influence mean?
So let's define that, right? Someone who has a platform, right? They have a large following on social media specific to the state of Idaho, or they're an elected official, or they are an organizational leader that has influence and resources that is actively engaging and promoting a message to influence people.
Okay. So great. Social media, I don't care at all. Big personal following doesn't matter to me at all. Elected official, that matters to me. Okay, 100%. Because if you're elected and representing Idaho, I want to talk to you and understand your perspective, for better or for worse for you, by the way, right? If you come on the show and you're like, and that's why Israel, or that's why Hamas, or that's why blah, 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 and you're an elected official, it's like, okay, well, like the people of district, I don't know, 90, we don't have 90 districts, but like that, okay, the people of district 90 elected you. I want to understand what you have to say that's valuable for them and, understand that. So 100% elected official. There are organizations with political influence in the state. I don't know that all organizations are created equally, right? Like I have an organization, right? Like you could have an organization, right? Say we have a nonprofit, like you can make a nonprofit with 3 people. So just by the category of like, okay, you have an organization is irrelevant to me. It's okay. Is this somebody, like when I talk to elected officials, is this somebody is this an organization that actually engages in conversations? Is this an organization that actively, engages with politicians or runs bills, things of that nature? Okay, yeah, like I would like to talk to somebody who's running bills and actively engaging in those types of things. And again, if they have deplorable views left or right, if they have deplorable views where they're like, I think we should have gender reassignment surgery optional for every elementary kid in the state of Idaho, I'd be like, that's a hot take, right? And again, if it's just a random person, it's like, yeah, I'm not interested in talking to you. But if it's like, oh no, this organization is responsible for like 40 bills last year, and they talk to all of these people and they donate aggressively, it's like, I wonder what this organization is about. Like, help me understand this, right? Because again, the people of Idaho should know who this organization is and what they're doing. And again, for better or for worse, they might come on and be like the most reasonable people ever. I'm like, wow, I didn't see that coming. Or they might come on and say something crazy. I'm like, okay, man, like if that's your position, then like, okay, for better or for worse, the people of Idaho can see it. So again, I think it just really depends on the scale and who the people are and what they're doing. Then of course, there are views and positions where it's like I just don't have it in me. It's like I can, whenever I have somebody who's really hot, it's like I'm going to get so much hell for this just talking to them, just trying to understand what their position is. Some days it's like I just don't have it in me to have that conversation. And like I got to go get like 8 hours of sleep and relax. But yeah, so that's kind of how I work through it.
Idaho politics is famously contentious right now. Do you try to lean into that conflict, or do you try to steer clear of it?
Lean into it in that I want, okay, let's say Medicaid expansion. Pick a bill from the last legislative session, like a contentious one.
Well, let's take the one, was it the House Joint Memorial one?
There is
right?
number one. There we go. I was hoping you'd say that one. Okay, so I think Heather Scott ran that, Representative Heather Scott from up north. And right away, it's like, this is interesting. Like, first off, I got differing answers on like, wait, what is this? Some people were saying, oh, it's a request to the Supreme Court to repeal the decision. Other people were saying like, no, she's trying to outlaw it in Idaho. And I was like, wait, which is it? Or is it both? Is it one? Is it the other? So I had people come on. I invited Representative Heather Scott to come on, and she came on and explained her position and what she thought. And again, no screaming and yelling. It was just like, hey, just help me understand this. Like, help me understand this perspective. And her perspective, you can go listen to her. And I was like, okay, great. Like, we're not, and by the way, we're not yelling at each other. Like, just help me understand it. And then I followed up with other people who were like, first off, that's not what this bill is. So then we immediately had a disagreement about what the bill was. And other things came out of that with not just what the bill was or wasn't, but what, there was that whole add the words movement that I didn't know anything about at the beginning of the legislative session. But essentially, in Idaho, this is tricky. The broad statement was, in Idaho, you can be fired for being gay. Your sexual orientation can be used as a fireable offense. And then everybody's like, okay, first off, we're a right to work state. That's not true. And it's like, okay, right to work state's actually a union thing. It's not like, can you be fired for something? And what it comes down to is, and I got attorneys on the show to help me understand it. They're like, look, if you are a company, I think it's 14 employees or fewer, then federal regulation does not kick in to prevent it to affect what employers can fire you on. Now, Idaho does have a certain degree of protections for people, but no, if you're working, I think, again, don't quote me, but I think it's 14 employees or fewer within the corporation, you can be fired for your sexual orientation. So like if you have a photo of you and say I was gay and I had a photo of me and my husband on my desk at work, and the employer can, just like you might have a photo of, you and your wife at work. Your employer comes by and says, oh, who's that? It's like, oh, that's my husband. I've never done a bad job. I have no reason to be fired. He's like, okay, well, you're fired because we're not hiring gay people. If there are like 10 people in the company, employer can do that. And Idaho wouldn't have a lot to do about it, nor would the federal government. If there are 20 people in the company, I have federal protections. A lot of things came out of that. So in just engaging in that conversation to understand where Representative Scott was coming from, and then understand where, for instance, Senator Wintrow and other people came on that disagreed with it and didn't like it. Understanding all of that, I got way more clarity about what the actual bill was. I understood who the people were more. I understood what those perspectives were, instead of saying these people are bigoted bastards. It's like, okay, look, I hate going extreme, like, and they may be whatever you want to call them. But to me, there was just somebody willing to come in and explain a position. Whether I agree with that position or not, I understood that person more as just a person with a position, right? And it was not like as monstrous and crazy it was. And it spurred a lot of other conversations that are wrapped around this issue within the state of Idaho. So to me, I found that to be a super valuable and fruitful conversation, not just for that one-off or two conversations directly around that, but for everything else that came out of it as well. So yeah, like I try to engage in things that I think are done in good faith and try to root out and understand them if there's something to be understood. Excuse me.
So how do you decide when to challenge a guest versus letting them talk?
That's a great question. So there's always a question of like, are you just going to argue with people? And okay. As a younger person doing this, as a younger Idahoan, I didn't know a lot. Okay. So I'll give you an example. I'll give you a perfect example. There was somebody running in 2024 in the primaries for Ada County Commissioner. Okay. And that person was emphasizing that he wanted to, I believe, put more pressure on Sheriff Clifford to deport more illegal immigrants or aliens, whatever, within Ada County. And I was like, oh, like that first off, like, can you tell the sheriff what to do? And he's like, well, anyway, goes back and forth. What I didn't know at the time, because I was younger and less knowledgeable about these things, is Sheriff Clifford can't deport anyone. Like Sheriff Clifford can't go outside of Ada County, right? Like in a joint operation, sure, something like that. But like Sheriff Clifford can't grab someone. He doesn't have, and then say like, okay, I'm individually going to determine you're an illegal alien, because Sheriff Clifford doesn't have like the roll sheet that the federal government has or ICE has and stuff. And then he can't just throw him in the back of, a sheriff car and be like, I'm driving you to the Canadian or Mexican border and kicking you out of the car. Like he can't do that. So there are problems like that pop up that, in hindsight, it's like, it would have been better. I would have been a better host had I known that, because I could have engaged in a more thoughtful conversation. Ultimately, it's not my job to always argue with people. I had somebody running for Eagle City Council this year who was saying that she wanted to change HOA laws in Eagle. And I was like, these are regulated by the state. She's like, no, you can layer things on. I'm like, yeah, but like there are people, like, let's go talk to Representative John Weber. He tried to pass an HOA bill last year and he got crushed by like the Home Builders Association. She's like, no, I know, but you can layer things on top with the city. I was like, okay, thinking in my head, I'm like, okay, look, you and I aren't going to agree, but that's not the point of this conversation. Right? Like there's no reason to like bite onto this one and just hold it. The individuals listening to this can either figure it out for themselves. And you know what, Matt? What if you're wrong? Like, what if this person happens to be right? what are you going to do then? So I have to balance these things with, do I want to sink my teeth into this and die on this cross and make this entire episode about HOA laws in Idaho? How sure am I that I'm right? And I was pretty sure, but I wasn't 100% sure. And if you do that, you're going to lose the capacity to have the rest of the conversation with this person. And this might just be one of 10 points this person's running on. And the other 9, it to everybody's mind might be dynamite. They might be great. And if you make the decision to make this all about the thing that you may or may not agree with this person on, you lose all of that. So it's this real difficult balance of, look, how sure are you? Yeah, you can bring up what you think to be true maybe once or twice, but at the end of the day, is this really worth it? Knowing that you're going to lose all the other opportunities to talk about other things in the show. So it's a really tough question, and I kind of just have to take it case by case.
So in my experience, I've noticed that people in the state, especially in Idaho politics, tend to avoid contention, right? I mean, there are factions within that political spectrum that, lean into it. And there are others that just like, oof, I'm out. I don't want anything to do with this.
Sure.
Do you feel like avoiding contention gets in the way of honest political conversations?
It depends. It depends on a lot of things. Okay. So I have a family member who would always articulate, like, you don't want to have an honest conversation. It's like, okay, but honesty is determined by, you're defining honesty based on what you think honesty is. Okay. And what you think honesty is focusing on all of these negative things, right? Only the negative things. And this is very common for people in general. They're like, you have to have self-reflection. It's like, yeah, but your version of self-reflection is just saying I'm this terrible person for all these 10 reasons. Like, if you're going to have an honest, balanced self-reflection, yeah, maybe you've done 10 bad things, but you probably also did 10 good things. Like, are you looking at those 10 good things? Because that's actual self-reflection, both positive and negative. So having an honest political discussion, I think a lot of people fall into the category of, like, you have to be honest about who this person is. And what they're really saying is, I don't like some of the things this person has done. And therefore, allowing them to talk about this one thing that even may be good is not really representing them honestly, because you're not honestly showing all of the things or all of the thoughts or whatever it might be. So yeah, like, we have to have a reflective conversation that actually reflects at least whatever the topic is, right? Here's a great question. Here's one for you. I recently had a show with Representative Jason Monks. Loved the show, had a great time. I've had him on several times. Very much enjoy his willingness to come in and have these conversations. We never like get in fights or anything. And we were talking about school choice. There is a lawsuit right now against Idaho because the lawsuit is alleging that the school choice bill, which essentially takes, like, it's a tax credit. I know it's a tax credit, but you only get the tax credit if you've already paid money to a private school. So the way I always put it is, look, if I fly from California with a layover in Chicago and then land in New York, do I say, hey man, I flew to New York last week? Or do I say, I flew to Chicago? No, you say you flew to New York. Like, you don't care where the layover was. You care about, like, where the destination was. So in this case, the school choice tax credit goes from $5,000 from the state to the individual parent, and then that individual parent to the school. And that's it. So it's like, okay, you're giving the money from, from the state to the school. And people are saying that in doing that, you should have some obligation to, I don't know, not discriminate against people based on their religion. Right. And, that's what the lawsuit's alleging. So he came in, we were talking about this, and look, did we hit all of the points of what school choice is or is not? Did I get clarity? Did I get an answer that I was like, okay, that resolves everything in my head, all my questions? Yeah, no, I didn't. Not from everything. But that doesn't mean we had a dishonest conversation. It just means that, we engaged a complex topic that has a lot of different facets. We could probably do another episode on it, but, it's a difficult thing. So should you avoid all contention? I mean, I don't know. It depends on the person. It depends on your capacity to have a conversation. It depends on your capacity and willingness to hold tension in your head and hold your own feelings and thoughts on something at bay while you have the conversation. It depends on a lot of things. So yeah, like, we need somebody who's going into the middle saying, hey man, can you just come sit in this chair next to me and talk? And we're going to talk, and you know what? We're going to talk in front of 1,000 people, but we're going to pretend 1,000 people aren't there, and we're just going to talk like normal people. We need somebody willing to do that. And part of that is dealing with topics that are very difficult that people wrestle with, for sure.
So I'm really glad you brought all of that up. And one point I want to clarify is, and I've written about this extensively, is there's a difference between conflict and contention, right? People see contention as they're raised to believe that contention is bad. That, religiously it's evil or it's wrong and leads you down a negative path. But conflict can be good, right? Conflict is a disagreement, but conflict can lead to learning. Conflict can lead to coming to a better understanding of things. And so that's why I feel like, we lean into conflict and understand it and call it out and address it, right? Using clear boundaries, healthy boundaries, and understanding, where you're at and meeting people where they're at.
Yes.
So,
Yes, that's a beautiful way of putting it. Yes.
and you mentioned self-reflection. I'm really glad you said this because that leads to the next question is, everyone in the space eventually gets labeled. I mean, I've been labeled so many different ways. I'm sure you have too. And I guess, what would you say critics have said about you and the ranch?
Just that the number one thing people want to say is I'm biased, which is humorous because obviously, like, I think I've gone as far as anyone could in the state of Idaho in this medium while no one actually knows my position on things. And so, of course, the number one thing people on both sides say is like, this is a biased junk show. And it's like, okay, you couldn't name a single position I have on a single policy. No one could. Somebody said the other day in criticism of me, they were like, I don't know, I can't remember what it was. Oh, somebody like accused me of being like pro medical marijuana or something. I'm like, how do you see that? They're like, well, you interviewed that guy. I'm like, the guy who was trying to pass a bill during the legislature? I'm like, yeah, I interviewed him. I don't believe I said I agreed with him at any point. And by the way, the following day, I had the chief of police, I think Chief Bestershia from Meridian, come in and talk about the problems that medical marijuana would present to the city of Meridian. So I'm like, and I didn't say I agreed with him either. Like, but yeah, like I have all parties on. And if I ever have somebody on that you disagree with, like, I'd be more than happy to engage you if you'd be willing to come on and tell me what in good faith you think is wrong with that argument, whatever it might be. But yeah, so like people say they want to devalue the central tenet of the show, which is like, look, we all just want information. Right? What we're being fed is inflammatory conversation. What we're being fed is this algorithm driven, upregulated junk. But what we really want at the end of the day is the reason people continue watching something that's upsetting is they want a resolution, right? Like it opens up a problem. It's an open loop and you want to close the loop. Do you ever say, hey, are you a sci-fi guy? Do you like sci-fi?
So, yeah.
Okay, great. Did you see the new revamp of the Dune series? Okay, great. So 2 parts, right? And now, mind you, I grew up with like the OG Dune, which was just one long episode with like heart plugs and, Baron's like, he's floating around. So this one, I was really into it. I'm like, this is done so well. And we start getting to the end of the first one. I'm like, no, dude, he's just getting together with the people in the desert with the blue eyes. Like, what's going on here? And then, of course, it cuts, right? I'm like, oh, no. The second one comes out. I'm like, yes, here we go. We're going to get the completion. And I was there. I was ready because I was like, I want to see this. And then it ends with tension between him and his lady. And like, no, like I wanted to close. Why couldn't you just give me closure on this, man? And so if they do a third one, for sure, I'm watching it because I want that loop to be closed. So we have that tension. We have that loop. That's what we're being fed right now. But what we all really want is just to close the loop, to have a full, complete idea. And that's why I try to give people, it's like, here's this side, here's this side. Okay, we've closed the loop. Here's the 2 sides of the pancake, baby. You got both sides in crystal clear view. And if we need to do a 3rd interview or 4th interview on it, fine. We'll bring on more sides. That's fine. But that's what people really want. I think that's what we deeply want. I think it's what calms people down. And I think gives people enough understanding of the complexity that instead of feeling, which everybody wants you to feel, instead of making people feel like everyone's out to get them, the world is out to get them, the politicians are out to get them, all of these terrible people are coming for them. Instead of that, and again, I'm not saying that's never true, but instead of that, 99% of the time, it's like, oh, this is complex. And that doesn't mean I don't get to have a position. It doesn't mean I don't get to get enough information to be like, nah, I side with this guy or I side with that gal. It doesn't mean that. But what it does is it calms people down. They're like, oh, this is not as simple as they were pointing it out to. Okay, so it's not a matter of like, they all hate me and they want me to die. Okay, it's a matter of like balancing these regulations and, supply chain issues. And then, like add this other, law from 70 years ago that they never saw affecting us right now in 2025 like it is because we didn't have this other problem here. Like that's what it is. So when I talk about one of the biggest things that people come after you, they always just say, I'm biased one way or another. They either say I'm like a flaming lib or I'm a crazy righty because they want to dismantle the platform that holds everything in one. right? They don't want to have somewhere where you can hear from all sides, right? People don't want that. I interviewed Senator Mike Crapo recently. Second time he had come on, fantastic conversation with him. And people, this one guy in particular got so mad. You're platforming liars. You're a liar. You're letting him lie to you, all these things. And I ended up getting into a conversation with this gentleman. I said, look, man, you want me to be the person who knows all of the truths. First off, I'm not that person. Second, what he said in the clip that you commented on is verifiably true. They did take away income tax for tips. That is verifiably true. You're still saying he's like, yeah, but he's a liar about these other things. I was like, you want a platform that only reflects your view. That's fine, but I'm not that person. I'm going to have Senator Mike Crapo on, and then I'll have somebody else on who doesn't agree with Senator Mike Crapo. And that's fine. If you want that platform that holds space for both those people, this is it. If you want only the platform that says Mike Crapo is, this terrible person, there are plenty of those platforms. This one's just not it. So I take a lot of heat for that. And I recognize if I went one way or another, I could probably exponentially grow the audience instantly, but that's just not what we need. That's not what I think America needs and Idaho needs specifically to come back to be a more understanding, educated community that goes back to wrestling with the issues instead of trying to label each other as terrible things.
Well, I appreciate that approach. And I guess last couple questions here is, with all these interviews you've done, what have you learned and what's your takeaway on where we're at in Idaho?
Man, that's a great question. Well, look, let me be clear. If I knew a better place to live, I'd be living there. I moved here. I could have moved anywhere in the United States, and I didn't. I moved to Idaho, and I'm not sorry for a single second I moved here. So let me just put that out there. What I actually think is that Idaho has real problems, and we are struggling with those problems. And that doesn't mean that both sides are equally represented. It doesn't mean that we're solving them the best way, but we are struggling to solve those problems. And that's really important. We are working towards solutions. We have a legislature and a political body that largely is interested in solving problems. Now, they do not have the same perspective. Even if you took away, and I'm not saying you should, but even if you took away all the Democrats, within the registered Republicans that are in office, there are like 5 different groups. So it doesn't even matter that we have 2 parties, because in reality, we have like 7. It's a really wild thing to consider. So I think we are a state that is struggling to solve problems. It's complicated by the fact that you have large numbers of people like myself that have moved here, a lot of them for political reasons, but without really understanding the political landscape of Idaho. So you have these hyper polarized, politically motivated individuals moving here from out of state that don't understand the demographics and the landscape of the Idaho political system, that are very easily manipulated and persuaded. And they don't understand where the different, I'm sure you've seen a gajillion of them, like voter recommendation guides, right? Or voter, it's not even a guide. It's just like, vote for these people. And it might be, this organization or that organization, whatever it is. And you read through them and you're like, does anybody know anything about this dude? Because who put this list together? Because if you talk to this dude for 3 seconds, you're going to realize that's pretty crazy. But again, people don't know. And when people don't know, they lean heavily on, we outsource our research and our understanding to these other organizations and associations that are happy to provide it. So that complicates things because people don't know. You saw this very easily or very clearly with Speaker Moyle in the last primary. He almost lost the last primary to I believe the gal running against him was 27 years old and never held political office. And again, I'm not one of Speaker Moyle's constituents. I don't live in his district. I don't know the other person. But what I do know is here this person is, Speaker Moyle, who's been in Idaho politics for 28 years or some astronomical amount of time. And no one in his district knew him. It's they didn't know who Mike Moyle was because Star from 2020 to 2025 went from 10,000 people to 14,000 people. So those additional 14,000 people had no idea who Mike Moyle was. And they were just on their phones where, Mike Moyle was not. He was not on social media. He was not all over Instagram all day. And this other candidate was. Plus, they were all a glut of mailers going out against him. And again, I'm not for or against him. I'm not his constituent or anything. But all of it was $1,000 worth of mailers going out against him from out of state funding, trying to put down him and bolster up his opponent. And that kind of stuff, that's a real problem. So we have this real problem politically in Idaho that we have so many people that have moved in. It's hard to understand the political climate, even if you're paying attention all the time. And they have no idea what's going on. And it's very, very hard to find out in good faith.
So what's next for the ranch? What's next for you? Any new direction changes, or what's your plans?
Man, that's a really, really good question. I've been at this like almost 3.5 years. And I set out in the 2025 year, essentially like, okay, I've met enough people. I have enough purchases. I had the governor on like a month before, and then I had the lieutenant governor on, Scott Becky. That was fantastic. And then I had Senator Jim Risch on all at the end of 2024. And so looking at the 2025 session, I was like, okay, look, it's now or never. Like, you have everything you need. You have enough visibility. You have a more than enough credibility. Like, I think like you could build this thing. You could cover the entire legislative session in a way that has never been covered at all. You could cover local elections throughout the entire Treasure Valley. You could showcase things like Fish and Game. You could showcase things like the Department of Parks and Rec. You could talk to people that no one even knew existed, like water board members and things of that nature. And it's now or never. Okay. And I largely believe as we come to the end of October that I delivered on that. I was able to build essentially a hammer, a tool that no one else had in the state of Idaho. And I proved that you can do something with it in the year of 2025. So for me, looking forward into 2026, kind of coming together potentially with some of the partners that I've had in this, it's okay, look, we have this thing now. We have this platform. We have the ability to talk to people in Idaho and educate them in directly in ways that have never existed before. What do we educate them on? Do we educate them about jobs that are available and pass forward to education and careers that have never, like, there are these careers right now. One of the biggest issues in the state of Idaho is how do we keep our youth that are graduating from high school here in Idaho? We have to offer them some kind of upward economic prosperity and potential. Great. How do we do that? They have to know about it. They have to know about it. Okay. Do we do that? How do we showcase the incredible work that Parks and Rec has been doing and help people that have moved here that don't know anything about the state parks because we didn't grow up going to like Thousand Springs and Hagerman or wherever it might be. We didn't grow up going to these places. So guess what? We're not going to take our kids there because we don't know about them. And you know what happens in a generation? Our kids grow up without knowing anything about them. And we lose support for our state parks, right? What do we do about that? How do we address? There are all of these questions. We have this communication tool now. How do we work to use it as effectively as possible, knowing that it's never going to be about what Matt thinks. It's never going to be about what Matt thinks is the right way or the wrong way. It's going to be about Idaho, right? Like, this is a podcast for Idaho by Idaho. And I want to lean into more of that as much as I can till I can't do it anymore.
Thanks, Matt. Really appreciate you coming on the show. I appreciate the good work you're doing. Everyone go listen to the Ranch podcast. It's on YouTube. It's on Spotify. Where else is it?
Anywhere podcasts are found. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
YouTube, Spotify, Instagram, TikTok. You can find it anywhere, any of the audio platforms as well.
And I'll post links in the description. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Greg. Thanks for having me on.